Okay, so the third part, the spinal motor neuron we did, then brainstem, then the highermost in the hierarchy, the cerebral cortex. It modulates the action of motor neuron in brainstem as well as the spinal cord. Not only the spinal cord, but it also modulates the action of motor neuron in brainstem. So the ability to organize complex and fine movement, and that too with the precision, it depends upon the control from the cerebral cortex, the motor cortical area, right? These cortical motor command, which controls the neuron in the brainstem and the spinal cord, they descend via two paths, two tracks. One is corticospinal tract. Okay, corticospinal tract, and other one is corticobulbar tract. Corticobulbar tract, right? Now the corticobulbar tract, the fiber from this tract, they control the motor nucleus in the brainstem that move the facial muscle, while the corticospinal tract, they control the spinal motor neuron that move the trunk and limb muscles, right? The trunk and limb muscle, upper as well as lower limb muscle, and in this one, the face and the neck. The face and the neck, we can say. The corticobulbar control the motor nuclei, facial muscle, mainly the facial muscle. Forget about the neck. Neck will again come in the axial skeleton, facial muscle. And we all know the cerebral cortex, it acts on spinal cord or the spinal motor neuron directly and indirectly. Directly means, by directly we mean it has the action direct on the alpha motor neuron, one to one, and indirect via acting on the interneuron. So that is the control of the cerebral cortex of the spinal motor neuron. Now these corticospinal tract, they have got systemic representation. Like if we say the area which is represented in the motor cortex area, if we cut few of the neuron, one part of the neuron that controls the neck and the other part of the neuron that controls the trunk, right? Neck and trunk. If we provide the lesion or on these particular motor homunculus, and then we notice, what we will notice? We will notice that the neurons within the spinal cord at the level of the neck segment, the brachial plexus level, and the neurons located in the spinal cord at the lumbar plexus level, they will also die down. They will reduce in number. It means there is topographic representation for the trunk neurons. They have got direct connection with the lumbar area, the spinal motor neuron which controls the pelvis. Instead of the trunk, just remember it, just make it pelvis. Okay, pelvic area. And if we do the lesion of the neurons within the motor homunculus which controls neck, then we will notice that there is reduction in the number of the neurons within the spinal cord at the brachial plexus level. So there is point-to-point representation, topographic representation systematically along the entire pathway, starting from the spinal cord to the brainstem to the motor cortex, right? Now these corticospinal tract which are coming from the motor cortex, it will be coming from primary motor cortex, right? It will be coming from premotor cortex, and it will also be coming from somatosensory cortex. Okay, somatosensory cortex. So the primary motor cortex, which lies along the precentral gyrus in the Broadman area number 4, and then this premotor in the area number 6. So the axon of the cortical neuron that project to the spinal cord, they are called as the corticospinal tract. They are the massive bundle of almost about a million millions of the axons are there. Out of those millions of the axons, one third will originate from the primary motor cortex. Only one third will originate from the primary motor, not the entire 100%. Then the other one third will originate from the premotor. Okay, other one third. And the rest of them will originate from the somatosensory. Some books say like 30, 30 and 40%. Someone say one third, one third, one third. Okay. So these fibers, these axons, million of the axons originating primary motor, premotor and somatosensory, they will travel in a combined path that is called as corticospinal tract. Corticospinal tract. So almost 40% of the fibers, they are originating from the somatosensory cortex, and these tracts which are originating from the somatosensory cortex, they will end up at the dorsal column, dorsal lateral column. So they regulate the transmission of afferent input through the dorsal horn. It means we can say these descending corticospinal tract coming from the somatosensory area of the brain will modulate the sensory signals too. Okay, they will modulate the sensory signal too. Now these tracts say they are divided into two parts. One is ventral corticospinal and the other one is lateral corticospinal tract. Lateral corticospinal tract. Now the ventral corticospinal tract, they originate primarily the axons which are originating from the premotor, the Broadman area number 6, they will form the ventral corticospinal tract, and few from the area number 4, mainly from the area number 6 and the few of the zones in area number 4, they will form the ventral corticospinal tract. These descending fiber, they terminate bilaterally. And send the collateral, they will terminate bilaterally and send the collateral to the medial brainstem pathways. Medial brainstem pathways. They are going down to the spinal motor neuron. They are also sending the collateral to these medial brainstem pathways. And what was the function of the medial brainstem pathway? To maintain the posture. By regulating the axial and proximal limb muscles. Right. Now, these lateral corticospinal tract, they originate in two motor area, that is almost both the motor and premotor, area number 4. Most of the area number 4, few of the fibers from the area number 6 too, and the somatosensory cortex, that is Broadman area number 3 to 1. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, almost from entire of them. Okay, and these corticospinal tract they cross, like in the medulla, they will get collectively form a pyramid, that is called as a pyramid at the medulla. That is the characteristic feature of the medulla at the lower part, and there will be the decussation of the corticospinal tract, and they will terminate to the opposite side. So fiber from the sensory cortex terminate primarily in the medial portion of the dorsal horn. So collateral fibers project to the dorsal column nuclei, and their termination, because they are going to the dorsal column, we can say the fiber which are coming from the somatosensory cortex and with the via the lateral corticospinal tract going to the dorsal column, they will actively modify the sensory signals. So the corticospinal fibers, these corticospinal fibers, whether they are the ventral or the lateral, along with the corticobulbar, these corticospinal and corticobulbar, these travel through the posterior limb of the internal capsule. If you can recall back, like in basal ganglia, we were doing, say, this was the caudate nuclei, there was the thalamus, then there was the putamen, lentiform, right, globose, and then in between those tracks were there. This is the internal capsule. This is the internal capsule, and you will read in the anatomy, the internal capsule, it has got the anterior limb, posterior limb, there is the genu. So these corticospinal and corticobulbar tract, they travel through the posterior limb of the internal capsule to reach the ventral part of the midbrain. To reach the ventral part of the midbrain, and from the midbrain they will go to, from the midbrain, ventral midbrain, they will go to the pontine nuclei. Like in the pons, they are the nuclei, pontine nuclei. So they get like separated in between these pontine nuclei. They go, and at the level of the medulla, they again recollect. Okay, they again rejoin or regroup, we can say, in the medulla to form the medullary pyramid. That medullary pyramid, where exactly I try to draw that, this one, yes, this one, this medullary pyramid. So that is the characteristic feature of the medulla. This is conspicuous landmark on the ventral surface, ventral midbrain, then ventral pontine, and the ventral medulla. So within the ventral medulla, they form the pyramid, and about 3/4, or we can say 75% of the corticospinal tract, 75% of the corticospinal tract, they cross over to the opposite side. They cross over to the opposite side in the pyramidal decussation, and that pyramidal decussation happens almost at the lower part of the medulla, or we can say at the juncture of medulla with the spinal cord, junction of the medulla with the spinal cord. And these crossed fiber, they will descend in the lateral column at the dorsal aspect, or we can call them dorsolateral column of the spinal cord. Dorsolateral column of the spinal cord, forming the lateral corticospinal tract. And the uncrossed, 25% uncrossed fibers, they will descend in the ventral column, and they are called as ventral corticospinal tract. So the lateral and ventral division of the corticospinal tract terminate approximately in the same region, whether this is the ventral one or the lateral one. They will approximately 19-20 का जो फर्क बोलते हैं ना, they will approximately in the same region of the spine cord, where that lateral and medial system of the brainstem is terminating, the corresponding. Okay, and the cerebral cortex, this cerebral cortex, it acts on the brainstem through, this one we have covered is the corticospinal. They act via this cerebral cortex via corticobulbar tract at the brainstem, right? And these corticobulbar fibers, they control the movement of the muscles of head and face. Head and face. Okay, head and face. And they terminate in the cranial nerve. Cranial nerve are mostly like, they are the mixed, the motor and sensory cranial nerve nuclei in the brainstem. So in human being, the corticobulbar fibers, they form monosynaptic connection with the motor neuron. Monosynaptic connection with the motor neuron for the trigeminal, mainly the trigeminal, the facial, and hypoglossal. These three nerves. Facial, trigeminal, and hypoglossal nerve. The trigeminal motor nuclei and this facial motor nuclei, they receive cortical representation from bilateral. They have got a bilateral representation. So the motor neuron innervating the upper part of the face, this face, the upper part of the face, the motor neuron that innervate the muscles of the upper part of the face, they receive approximately equal number of the axons from both the cerebral hemisphere, whereas those innervating the lower face, they receive fiber mainly from the contralateral. Say this is the left side, this is the right. Then the lower part of the face, left side, lower part of the face will receive fibers coming from the right part of the cortex. Similarly, the right lower part of the face receives the fibers from left cortex, left corticobulbar tract. But upper part of the face, it has bilateral representation. Okay, bilateral representation. That's why damage to the corticobulbar fiber on one side will produce weakness only, say if there is right corticobulbar tract is getting affected, then there will be the weakness on the left lower face. The upper left face will be normal because it has got the bilateral representation. Okay, so that's how the cortex controls these spinal as well as the brainstem pathway.